Well, Joe had another school shooting. In fact, I found out later there's an incident the same day somewhere else, but this one obviously got more of the attention because of the amount of victims and so on. But I think the first thought that comes to the minds of parents who have kids in school, either here or anywhere, could that happen here?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the first thing that you hear any communities that are impacted say. I can't believe this happened here, and the reality is it can happen anywhere. And, we have protocols and procedures in place locally with the police department and how we've trained our officers to respond to these situations. And you've seen that trend throughout the country. I mean, yesterday in watching the video and seeing how the kids were evacuated, that that's been trained before. It seemed highly organized, and that's what we would hope would happen here. We've put our whole department through active shooter response and training. In fact, we've trained with our local KROC ambulance as well as Rochester Fire Department to have a fully integrated response, meaning not only are we looking to end the shooting threat, but to immediately render aid to victims and entering the building while it's still an active scene. Local first responders, other than police, Rochester Fire, KROC, have trained with us and are prepared to enter buildings and save lives and move people that may be injured quickly to staging and evacuation. Because these things over time, people that have gunshot wounds, they're not necessarily, the wound itself is it's what happens. It's blood loss or obstructed airways that kill from gunshot wounds. And if you can stabilize those things quickly, blood loss through tourniquets, collapsed lungs or other things through needle decompression is what paramedics and EMS will use to open airways for gunshot trauma. You're saving lives, and that's a timing thing. And we've trained to our officers, and our officers have trained with Rochester Fire and KROC to get in quickly and get people out and get them the medical treatment they need. So it's kind of a two-phased approach. Obviously we have officers that are would be looking for any active shooter to be going to the gunfire immediately, and additional arriving units then turn into life-saving mode. So, it's something that we hope we never have to put into practice locally, but obviously we're going to be prepared if we do, and we're prepared to help surrounding agencies as well. And these things can happen any time and any place and anywhere, and we have protocols in place that will immediately alert every officer through their cell phone that an active shooter situation is taking place. That's part of a dispatch protocol. And when that happens, the reason for that is so officers who are off duty, officers who may be off duty and out and about will know to respond, because in a situation like we have, like they had yesterday in Florida, we'll need everyone. We don't have the luxury of being in a large metro area where there are literally hundreds of officers that can immediately respond, like yesterday in Florida. We'd be relying on 150 so officers locally and deputies, as well as response from surrounding counties and communities. But again, you're talking about a time delay, and time is essential in these situations.
So that's the response side of it, but I'm thinking, obviously schools, at least they shouldn't be anymore, they're not as open as they once were. A lot of them have security measures in place, a lot of them have security officers.
The protocols for local schools have changed. They're secure. You have to ring a bell, essentially, and have communication with the office and announce, why you're there.
But in this case, it sounds like they had something in place, but somehow... I was able to get in there.
The reality is that large buildings, large campuses, there's no such thing as complete security, especially with people coming and going throughout the day, seemingly blending in. Unless you build a wall around a school,
make it a prison.
Make it a prison. You can do your best to eliminate that, but clearly all it takes is one person holding a door or one person who appears to belong, students can come and go. We have open campuses in the high schools locally. Students come and go throughout the day. There are protocols in place, and there are certain entrances that people must enter. But I just don't. It's unrealistic to think that we're going to have complete security at our school buildings, and I don't know if we want to live in a society where schools are locked down as well. So.
Maybe one way to prevent future ones, and I don't know, your department's already been using your officers periodically look through social media looking for signs of criminal activity or a certain person, maybe.
One thing is that certain social media apps have filters where they can alert law enforcement to someone posting a gun or a threat, and we've found that out locally. But that doesn't mean that everything is going to be caught. Certainly, warning signs are. There's always warning signs, but there are a lot of warning signs out there, and which ones are going to become
the real thing.
Acted on, right? Yeah. And everybody can point fingers and Monday morning quarterback, but the reality is if someone hasn't committed a crime, and they're just what can we do as law enforcement?
Well, that was a thought I had, John, because we're hearing from preliminary information that this guy apparently had some posts that you. And at least what I heard, well, why weren't the police looking into this? Or why didn't some of the students notify police if they knew about it and things like that? But how far can you go in looking at these posts?
Well, hindsight's always 20/20, right? And when there are elements of crimes committed due to threats, or there are elements that may indicate someone is it could be a danger to themselves or other people, then law enforcement can take action. But those things only last so long. Emergency holds for mental illness only last so long. There are not enough beds. There's not enough facilities. It's not just a national problem. It's a local problem as well. So there are things that can be done, but the reality is that that this isn't the real world. Isn't an idealistic. It's not an idealistic place. Reality happens. Yeah, mental people with mental illnesses should receive treatment, but they can't receive treatment indefinitely. Mm-hmm. Law enforcement should investigate threats, and we do. But without elements of criminal offenses, there's not much that can be done. We can detain people, we can arrest them, but even that. There's not infinite detention in this country. There's a bail system. There are pre-supervised release systems. So, things aren't foolproof. It's just the reality of the world. It's unfortunate.
Well, that was one of the things that came to my mind. They were talking about, well, if these kids would have reported this to police, maybe they did. I don't know. I don't know if they talked to the kid or not, but. I'm thinking, okay, so is the thought, we always hear something, see something, say something. Right. If this kid had been on the radar of the police down there, you still wonder, would this have been prevented? Because are they hoping that maybe when the police talk to him that he wouldn't do it, that maybe he'd be afraid not to do it, or will he do it anyway?
Right, and there are certain risk assessment type indicators out there where you can look at someone, assess the credibility of a threat, and then determine if there is one. And we've done that at times. Sometimes a kid posting a picture of a gun on social media is them being stupid. They're kids. We've had that locally. We've responded. We've investigated. We've determined that there's no credible threat. We may or may not refer charges in those cases. The prosecutor may or may not prosecute in those cases, depending on the credibility of the threat and the realistic nature of it. Mm-hmm. We've had those cases many times over the years, locally. It just all depends, everybody, people can say, oh, well, I knew that if we were going to have a shooting, it would be that guy. Well, I can think of a number of people I've met in my life who are a little bit different, a little bit off, and if they had committed a shooting, I'd say, well, yeah, I could see that coming.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean there's anything to act on. I think if people honestly ask themselves that question or think of it in that terms, they can think of a number of people as well. And then ask yourself, what have you done about it? Have you let anybody know? Have you taken any steps to determine the credibility of the threat? And then, you know, that's what people need to do. I think we as a society need to look in the mirror and say, you know, what's going on? You know, I mean, we can blame guns, we can blame mental illness, we can blame politics, but the reality is something is happening in our society that didn't happen 100 years ago. It didn't happen 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Something has changed, and what is it? I don't have the answer. You know, there's a tendency to point fingers, to judge things in hindsight, to suddenly call for a need to change. But really, does anybody ever take a hard, deep look at it ourselves as society and say, what's wrong?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I get the feeling.
It's not one thing, it's many things.
I don't know why, John, I get the feeling we could be sitting down here in another month or two and have the same conversation.
Absolutely. And every time these things happen, it's a tragedy. It's something that shouldn't happen. And, you know, as someone in law enforcement, I thank God it didn't happen in our community. But I know that if it does, I know that we will be ready. It will certainly be a tragedy. I know that you know, we can train all we can, but there's still a time element, and a lot can happen in a few minutes. And that's the unfortunate reality of these type of incidents. And, you know, we'll do our best and hope that we can minimize whatever tragedy were to occur if it, God forbid, were to happen here.